camped beside him, and there was plenty of wildlife around them, and a wild dog was about to make his move when Sin pounced at him, and it broke his neck. And the wildlife approached and scattered about, and not bothering to share, the Sin dug his nails into the belly of the beast, and he ripped out guts and out before eating it. Then he went for the fatty sides, the ribs and the liver. Horses stoically ignored Sin as if he was eating while he ate some dry grass nearby. And Brunhilde got out her fishing lure and bait that turned into a lemur, and with this lure she reeled in a pretty large grey Morelia or python. Citrin swallowed the python whole the same way he had it in the fake lemur, and she then dug out from her back a dry salmon and a large piece of smoked ham. He ate it quickly and dexterously, and he made certain not to bloody his outfit, and it was meaningless effort since his outfit was already red. Sin had made a mess of his attire, and he had gone feral for dieting for a few hours, and Brunhilde had seen she washed the blood off his face with a water skin, and the outfit was the same as before. Brunhilde had a few copies of the outfit since cashmere cloth sold well, and cashmere was a type of hair fiber made taken from goats, and it had 3 times as much insulating power than sheep wool. When Brunhilde was done, she started gesticulating to Ahi, and then Horsey asked, "Can you understand what Brunhilde is saying?" And Sin put his fingers close to his thumb, and shaking his head, Horsey commented, "I heard words, and at least she's speaking nonsense that resembles sentences, and the trick is the hand gesture, paying attention to the hand gestures as well." And Brunhilde and Ahi tended to gesticulate like 2 Italians whenever they spoke their secret language, and this gesticulation was second nature to them. And Sin was mostly raised by his human mother, and as such he was not too entrenched in his draconic heritage. Then again, dragons had a watch and learn mentality, and they did not expel themselves to their broods like other species tended to do. And frankly, there was no need to do so. Dragons tended to be quite bright and rarely so helpless. Sin narrowed his eyes as he heard a perfect summary of his lack of skill. When the party was presentable, they continued training the caravan, and this time at a much lower pace, to avoid making them paranoid, and we found something that could be called a crossroad, and the party made its way towards it to casually engage the caravan. And we were all at a close distance enough to see the traveling party, and most of the people in the group were wearing white robes, turbans, or veils, and the maidens were sporting fancy jewelry, and a portion of them wore ornamental crowns with their veils trailing behind them. And of these maidens, their dresses had elaborate embroidery, and they also wore a ring in their annular. That's like a finger. And all of the men were clean-shaven with the exception of the eldest who wore ornamental beards. And the men were all tan and had curly black hair and brown eyes, and the maidens had lighter skin, and their eyes were either black or brown color. And the Onesco were wearing black attires with long elegant capes, and the weapons included spears, bronze shields, and damask swords. And they also did not wear armor since it slowed them down, and they were the only people in the group riding horses, and there was also the female archer riding in one of the elephants. And like the man, she was bald, and she had slanted eyes and round ruby earrings, and she was the youngest of the mercenary group, a mere 12-year-old maid. And based on the trail of animal corpses we had scattered along the way, it was her job to shoot down any wild animal that might attack the caravan. And with just a single arrow, she could fell any beast. And before getting close enough to the group, she gave us a warning shot, and at the sound of her bow, 30 mercenaries took up positions around the caravan, and like we had expected, the entire group was paranoid thanks to our party's odd look, and the archer readied another arrow as she aimed it right at his forehead. He smiled and said, "Hi." The man we assumed was the head mercenary stepped forward and said, "Strange to see ladies like yourselves traveling alone. Forgive our rudeness. If you do be fools, perhaps, and if not, your trickery will only serve to bury you." Sin Brunhilde chose to let Ahi do the talking, and she did not understand the mercenary much, and Brunhilde could understand, but she wasn't in a mood for dealing with them. "My name is Ahi, that's Brunhilde, and the other is Sin, and my mount is Horsey, and we come in peace," said Ahi, putting his hand over his hat and bowing with his left hand outstretched to the side. Are you a maiden or a lad, brother?" asked the mercenary. The mercenary tried knew the correct pronoun. He shrugged his shoulders and said nothing, and this made the people within earshot start laughing. Slightly less paranoid, the mercenary asked, "And they call me Abiel, and I am of the Fang tribe. In search of wealth my charge goes." "And do you mind if we travel with you? There is 60 in number," inquired Ahi. It said the fan does all the mauling and pay the piper, little brother, said Abiel, rubbing his index finger and his thumb together. This was the universal sign for give me money. So now he's shaking his head. Then we will take the horse, said Abiel. And he says to the horse, this nice man wants to buy you. Horsey narrowed his eyes and he shook his head, and this made Abiel chuckle. And he was indeed a nice man. However, the fans were duty-bound not to lift a finger without some sort of payment. And one of the merchants in the caravan came to Abiel and said, ask for some cloth or artifact, and I will pay for the sailor's passage. Abiel nodded and said, pretty dresses, bunny bells, a horse saddle, some jewelry maybe, anything at all would do at this point. And Brunhilda was rummaging through her large pelt bag, and she got out from an intact polar bear pelt, and the merchant saw her having a trouble lifting the belt out, and he came to help her with the burden, and he was also not too keen on having such a lovely pelt dirty by the sandy ground. The merchants examined the pelt from head to claws, and the mercenaries and the other merchants were coming closer to see the pelts of such a mysterious animal. And according to our guide, none of them had ever seen a bear in this continent. And Abiel asked Brunhilda, what is this? Brunhilda was about to respond, but she shrugged her shoulders in response, and he said, Brunhilda speaks, yet she refuses to say anything. How unfortunate, and the other girl, what's her problem as a merchant? And I don't mean to be rude, but what are you people? I shrugged his shoulders, not understanding what the question, and Abiel intervened, saying, said, travel with us, the fan guarantees your safety, esteemed, let's say, ladies, and he and his party took their place in the center of the caravan along with the other woman, and the caravan continued on its merry pace until nightfall. Around this time, the caravan diverged towards a freshwater lake, and the people opened their tents beneath the few trees. Brunhilda too perched up a tent, and this one was composed of elegant white wool with golden embroidery flowery patterns, and its square shape was big enough to fit 4 people. While Brunhilda busied herself, he went to sit by the fire, and the red dress glowed a deeper crimson before the flame. Abiel was kindling the fire before his tent, and he naturally assumed that no woman knew how to light a campfire. Observing the flames, Abiel said to Ahi, not from around here, are you? He shook his head, and Abiel rose and brushed the dirt from his knee, and he said, smiling, no matter, Many beside her tears has traveled its dusty roads at night. Abiel brushed up a bit of the ground and revealed a fragment of a mosaic road, and pointing forward, he said, a remnant of an ancient and powerful empire, and its roads are still used even today, and one can still see them if you bother to dig them up. I have an interesting story if you want to hear it, as he said, laying down. Sure, why not, said Abiel, sitting down cross-legged on his left. Sintu sat beside Ahi, hearing to hear one of his bizarre whimsical stories. He started as thus. There was a powerful lord hunting in the desert, and he hunted many large beasts, tigers, elephants, and lions. And the animals eventually got tired of being hunted by this lord, and thanks to the lord's bad karma, he got attacked by a sphinx. And let me stop you there. What is a sphinx? Inquired Sin. And also lions and tigers don't live in the desert. So you finally do feel like talking, said Abiel, chuckling. Abiel then added, but do tell me, what is a sphinx? A sphinx has a body of a lion, the wings and bird wings, and the torso of a woman, explained Ahi. That sounds hard, brother. Continue, said Abiel, yawning. Like I was saying, the sphinx stole the Lorarito, and she hasn't one lives on its own substance and dies when it eats itself, said Ahi before being interrupted again. It's a fireplace, as Sin raising his hand. A firework, like those shiny ones that start real bright and they get smaller until you have to throw them again, said Abiel, holding an imaginary sparkler. No, the correct answer was a candle. If the sphinx had been here, she would it in your heart like she ate the heart of the Lord. And since she has slain her victim, she cut him into little pieces and spread him all over the desert, and she left a knife on each body part to stand as a warning against poacher, continued Ahi. And seriously, the story was gruesome in somewhat far-fetched. And when the Lord's mother saw her, she asked the sphinx for permission to bury her son, and the sphinx gave the mother the same riddle. And when the mother answered correctly, the sphinx killed herself, as was tradition. And the mother buried all of the pieces of her sons whenever she found them, and it was too much of a hassle for her to stitch the body back together. And eventually an oasis grew on top of each of the buried body parts, and that's where oases come from in the desert, explained Ahi, finishing his story. When Ahi finished, he noticed that Abiel was resting his head on his hand, and this guy was pretending to be asleep. And he got up and he went to eat a catfish Brunhilde had caught, and soon two things came along, and the night was peaceful, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the Titan moon was crescent shape, and everything was peaceful in the desert. Alright, that's the end of it. Saturnastra Ahi, chapter 15, the city of the rush. Ahi traveled with the caravan for a few months, and during that time the subject of selling Ahi and the others as slaves never arose. And it was an anathema to deny a person's free will, and even the woman had a choice in the matter, and this choice was subverted to the traditional societal pressures like the threat of poverty. And this vast region had shifting borders, and since the land was mostly bare and inhospitable, there wasn't an incentive to create deliberate borders, and most of the city-states were built around large reservoirs of fresh water. And there were a few towns that were loosely affiliated, and the tribal system still exists, though it was slowly given away to a centralized, autocratic government. Each city had its own rules and mores, and they also had their own rulers who maintained friendly relationships with the neighbors just for the sake of trade. And this emphasis on mercantilism created an unspoken federation among the 25 tribal leaders in the northern region. And once every 5 years, all of the leaders met in an undisclosed location to agree on the rules that affected that affected them all. And other cities had 2 or 3 walls and a few unincorporated lateral landscapes for defense. And the inner wall was reserved for the castle and the temple head, and all of the head temples were known to be varied. And this was due to the region's bizarre religious practices. And the names of all of the deities and what they were about had to be kept secret. The army, the king, and the guilds, and even the individual households had their own patron god. And the name was kept a secret to prevent their neighbors from using their god against them. And this practice was naturally kept for everyone except the fans, and they told everyone about their totally amazing patron god, who listened to everyone. Today the caravan was seeking entrance at the gates, and the gates had intricate mosaic panels that resembled animals, and as outsiders, his crew did not have a rite of safe passage. And their appearance alone raised the usual suspicion, and in the continent of Persia, outsiders would be treated poorly and felt unwelcome. And since it was a merchant city, the guards had a gentler way of conducting the initial interview. And his party was invited to the White Castle for the interview, and they were seated on top of cushions within a waiting room. And the place was nicely furnished, and there was a gentle breeze that would enter to the large arabesque windows. And they were greeted by a savvy old woman dressed in elegant green robes and held by a pearly crown, and to instill a sense of duty she was unlike the natives of the city. And she was a pale human lady that had green eyes and red hair. And she was the Hatircha of the walls surrounding the city, and she had been invoked for the sole purpose of dealing with its foreigners. The Hatircha asked Ahi, "Are you comfortable? Would you like us to bring you anything to eat?" "No thanks, we already ate," said Sin. And Brunhilde elbowed him to get him quiet. And the Hatircha were a sort of guardian spirit. Homes, elements, graves had their own Hatirchas. And they were also a type of power akin to blessing, and as a whole mankind could only tap into the power of a blessing once per month, and more faithful individuals could call upon power of the Hatirchas on a daily basis. And in this respect, Hatircha sitting before her was a physical manifestation of the divine blessing embedded in the walls, and due to their nature, the Hatirchas were not prone to lie. And acting in accordance with the blessing inscribed upon it, the Hatircha said to us, "If you would not have tea, then allow me to disperse with the pleasantry. The masters are greatly unnerved by your presence, and they were hardly amused when I informed them that 2 of you were dragons." "So it is not as if we're big dragons," commented St. Johnny. "We have never had pleasant dealings with your kind. 1,000 years ago, an ice dragon invaded our lands, and the ancient masters slew the beast by calling upon the sacred names of the Vakis of fire. And it's imperative that you understand why I recommend that you leave the city and never return," said the Hatircha firmly. "If you are a guardian, then you must sense our intentions," said Ahi carefully. "We mean you no harm. There is rarely any intentionality in mindless destruction. It is foolish to defend your pets. Dragons will always be beasts," said the Hatircha, raising her voice, and the walls shook a little, echoing her ire. He rested his head on his hand, and he closed his eyes, and he was thinking about witty combat, and he eventually nodded and looked at Brunhilde, and she whispered on his ear. And then he said, "Intentionality is a human thing, and at most we try always to act in accordance with our nature, and if humans intentionally conflict with our nature, then there is bound to be problems, and unlike humans, our kind does not take pleasure in bullying weaklings." The Hatircha was silent for a moment, and then she shook her head sadly, and she disintegrated into a whirlwind of pink rose petal. Ahi and Brunhilda sat there for 2 long hours waiting. And Brunhilda amused herself by drawing, and Ahi started counting the tiles on the roof in a vague attempt to find some defined pattern. And on the meantime, Sim paced the room back and forth, and eventually Albiol entered the room with his 2 men, and he handed Ahi 3 armbands made of cloth, and the cloth had 2 simple lines, the top one violet and the other one blue. And his men were wearing red ones with a symbol of the golden sun, and he said to Ahi, "In this city wear this armband. Violet means non-believer or foreign god, and the both won't let you in, and the blue means money or high merchant caste."
It's the only way that it can exist.
"You're welcome." And he put on guy clothing and cut your hair. This is only a suggestion, and goodbye, said Albiol departing. And he came back for a second, and he had time's a wasting. Brunhilda and Sim put it on their armband, and he was folding his arm and looking up and said, "I don't want to cut my hair." Brunhilda looked at Sim and Albiol from head to toe, and by now his hair was up to his waist, and it was pulled back by a red ribbon. And he had a golden he was wearing a white medieval dress, and he had a golden plated belt with rubies and a buckle. As for Sim, he was wearing a white gray dress with a leopard pelt. And Brunhilda was wearing a similar outfit. Brunhilda put it on his armband, and then he said, "Charlie, thank you." And with Brunhilda's approval, his party went into the city, and he was thankful that he was allowed to enter without having to cut his hair. The armband made certain that they were not pestered too much, and since President Oswald allowed he and Brunhilda to go undisturbed, and it was unseemly for women to walk outside without a man accompanying them. And since however, this did nothing to get rid of the rooster. From time to time, a bride would try to pickpocket a heel Brunhilda. However, Brunhilda was always carrying all of the main items, and whatever the thief managed to get was eventually returned to its rightful owner because of a curse. And it was better to avoid any needless scuffle with the local, and Brunhilda had the nasty habit of beating pickpockets to death regardless of their age or species. And the city had plenty of apartment buildings and private homes with a small inner walls, and all of the residential buildings were 1 to 3 floors high. And the homes were made of stone, wood, or clay. The fancier homes had elegant walls made of marble. And the marble in this region was either white with blue or reddish veins. However, this marble was often found along the coastline, so transporting it was quite a luxury. And other temples varied in shapes and size, and the officials wore cigarettes which casted their shadows over the city. And there were only 4 at the 4 cardinal points. And his crew tried to enter one, but the priests naturally shooed them away because they didn't have an armor that permitted their entry into the temple, but still that didn't stop them from trying. By now we had found the marketplace, and it was located in the center of the city, and there were some makeshift shops and tents. And Brunhilda pointed to a shopkeeper "Okay, Abuela," said he, walking out to the shopkeeper. And the shopkeeper was wearing red robes and a white turban, and he had a brass lash over his waist, and he had black sunglasses and a mustache, and upon closer observation we recognized him as the dubious merchant known as the Persian, one of our own. And smiling, he said, "Ahi, what brings you here? Want to buy more booze for another one of your little death parties?" "No, I just need information. How can I set up shop here?" inquired Ahi. Brunhilda and Sim came closer when they saw Ahi that Ahi knew this particular merchant. "It depends. One day shops need to purchase a rate from the merchant's guild, and it usually costs 10 darings or 10 siglos." And the merchant then took out several coins, and the figurines varied quite greatly. However, they had identical grades of silver and gold. And after sorting through them, the Persian held up a golden coin and said, "Contrary to logic, this darling golden coin is worthless than the silver coin, and in this place gold is more abundant than silver." And there you have it. Each region has its own unique coin, however they agree on the purity of its coinage. "So let me get this straight, you're here to stock up on gold for a cheaper price item," commented C. The Persian gave the thumbs up and nodded. And then he said, "On a side note, only the locals are allowed to own real estate. If you're planning on staying here for longer, I suggest you go to a merchant's inn. And if everything fails, read the notice post, and one can usually find a lonely old widow or something renting out a room." Following the Persian's advice, his party went to looking for an inn, and this time of year all of the inns were full, and there were merchants pouring in from all of the city. And it was the last few months before the monsoons made the roads impassable. And while his party was searching in vain for an inn, we took our time to read the notice board listing, and after sorting through the piles of spam, we found the rental listing. And when we spread out and observed the living condition of its proprietor, and our listener also did accompanying of all of the wiretaps pertaining to the owner. And eventually we found a few homes that were suitable to his needs. And we came back to him and relayed the information we had uncovered. And based on his instinct, the best home was a two-story house owned by a 40-year-old widow and two of her daughters, and she was renting the home to save up for her eldest daughter's dowry. And Brunhilde agreed with us that the widow was her best bet as far as lodging. And we led her head towards the western part of the city, and the roads were wide and the homes arranged in a block format, and they had none of the medieval serpentine twists and turns, and the heat was scorching at 110 degrees. And he and Brunhilde were used to such hot temperature, however, Sim was melting, and he kept breathing his icy breath into his hand to shield them off. And we eventually arrived at the house, and this house had only one floor, and it did, however, have 5 even-sized rooms and a large interior courtyard with a fountain. And the front entrance was held up by a column of two columns of color blue and red. And the floor of the kitchen garden had a nice checkerboard pattern with it, and the windows were large with iron bars and red curtains. As he went out to the metal door, and he knocked 4 times. A tiny window with sparks opened up, and a middle-aged lady said, "Who are you? What do you want? If you're selling something we aren't buying, get lost." "Sorry to bother you, man," said Simpson, taken aback by such hostile tone. "We are here about the rooms you read," he said as he giving a warm smile. "Talk about crooked teeth. Whoever you are, let me see your money first," said the lady. "Fair enough," said he, and Brunhilde showed the nice lady our money. Brunhilde had unloaded some of the goods we had while we were awake, and she opened a bag filled with seagulls and 2 golden coins, and the lady eyed them with suspicion, and Brunhilde then held up a coin which the lady readily took, and the lady beat it down, and she smiled. The tiny window closed, and we heard a lot of locks and bolts opening, and with a completely different tone, the lady said, "Come in, welcome. I will be much obliged to have such esteemed dignitaries in my humble abode." Brunhilde growled before bowing gracefully. "I beg your pardon," asked the lady. "She said she preferred the old way you were talking," said he. "Is that so?" said the lady, struggling. She led her to the dining room, and she brought a cushion, tails, and teeth for her 3 guests, and her 2 daughters were nowhere in sight, and she probably had told them to scram whenever there were strange visitors prowling about. And the tea had a sweet aroma and was honey-colored, and the glasses had exquisite golden arabesque pattern on its border, and it was a delight just looking at these little teacups. And he lifted the cup and he traced the edge of the mug with his index finger, and the lady before was in her late 40s, and she was wearing an elegant red dress with faint golden lines for decoration, and the dress had sleeveless overdress with a large black borders, and she wore metal bracelets and a golden ring on each thumb. And there was a bit of an awkward silence for a few minutes, and just as he was fascinated by his cup of tea, the lady was fascinated by the 3 strangers sitting before her, and she had never seen people like them, and even the palace among their tribes did not have blonde hair and blue eyes. And there was also the occasional albino, however, no one she knew had red hair or red eyes for that matter. She wanted to say something, but she did not want to lose that possible talent, and all she could do as of late was to keep up appearances, and little did she know that everyone in the city was on to her poverty. Sim was the first to break the silence. "Nice house you have here, madam." "Oh, why, thank you. My great-grandfather built it from scratch," said the lady. "My name is Tawasi, and my daughters are Surata, and wife of Bientisa, and my household is one of the most respectable in the city. I am seeing Charles Jair and Pasha Kamak, descendant of Albion of the North, currently single," said Sin in mimicry of Tawasi's introduction. He then pointed to Brunhilde and said, "And that's Brunhilde, daughter of Flaminga and Mordred. She is also a descendant of Albion of the North." And then looking at Ahi, he said, "And this is Ahi. I doubt you are in the mood to hear his long-winded introduction." And Ahi bowed and said, "Oh, you're no fun." "So, do you go to temple? The Ambas are my esteemed visitors and unbelievers. Are my esteemed visitors non-believers or followers of an unincorporated God? The Hatihas do not take kindly to unbelievers," warned Tawasi. Brujilda and Isin gained some thought to the answer, and dragons didn't have a formula as religion per se. From time to time, the descend their lucky stars that they were born dragons. And they also have some basic ideas about the afterlife with emphasis on reincarnation. They did not have a notion of good and evil or a strict code of moral. Unlike humans, they did not live with the uncertainty or fear of death, and as such they were never compelled to congregate for the sole purpose of begging for the help of a higher nameless god. And all those manners were released the prideful beings known as dragons. And Brujilda eventually nodded and whispered to Sin. And then Sin explained, we don't have a temple, but we used to congregate as a group and hear the divine wisdom of the high priest. And he will teach us about the land and the sky and the spirit creatures that live within it. And he was making reference to the religious tendencies of the humans that live in the north. Oh, so you have animistic tendencies, commented Tawasi. It is better to have one good friend than hundreds of unreliable little spirits, my dear. And he, surely every fine lady that you saw does not indulge in so fancy. No, said Ahi flatly. Tawasi decided not to push the matter further, and the Hatijas did not appear apprehensive, and we felt their eyes watching us, and she then asked the pertinent question, how long do you plan to stay in the city? Until Ahi gets bored, said Sin flatly. And how long does it usually take for her to get bored? Asked Tawasi, somewhat amused. A year or two, and we definitely cannot stay more than 2 years, and by then our family will sorely miss our company, explained Sin, making emphasis with his fingers to tell the time. For now, let us say you stay for a whole year, and how do you plan to pay for your room and upkeep? The food is included in the price, and I have a permanent maid to put the house in working order, explained Tawasi. Brujilda has plenty of junk to sell, and I knows someone belonging to the merchant's guild, so it won't be too hard for us to put a foot through the door, explained Sin, pointing to Brujilda's bag of holdings. And what sort of goods do you barter? Inquired Tawasi. Trinkets, weapons, pottery, jewelry, and fur, but mostly fur. Brujilda is a talented huntress, and she rarely wears up a sweat when catching her quarry, said Sin, proudly putting his hand over Brujilda's shoulder. He quickly removed his hand when he saw Brujilda glaring at him. This made Tawasi laugh, and she asked, and what about you, Sin? What are your talents? I know many herbs and potions, and I can cure just about any malady that can assail a human being, said Sin, smiling. And you, Ahi, what macro talents do you possess? I am a wedding planner, though I can also plan regular parties, explained Ahi. Tawasi patted her lips and thought, as anything such a skill could be used to make money. Then again, if they all claim to be so talented, then perhaps I can squeeze them for all they're worth, thought the woman. Tawasi then said, you are in luck. I have 3 bedrooms available, and they can be furnished in whatever way you like for a small fee. Do you want your own rooms, or will you be sharing them? She wants to know the price per room, explained Ahi to Brunhilde, who was a little pensive. 120 siglos, said Tawasi, and we said to Ahi, another guy came earlier and she was renting the room for 60 siglos. I think she's trying to charge us double. Brunhilde raised her fingers and made the peace sign, and catching one of Brunhilde's having since said, she will pay for 2 rooms for 190 siglos. No, the standing price is 120, said Tawasi calmly, but firmly, raising her voice a little. And the bartering went back and forth for a couple of hours, and eventually Tawasi's need to pay off some huge debts proved quite advantageous, and Brunhilde paid for 2 rooms and 6 months in advance, and plus meals and a room at the stables for horsing. And even with horses archy to consider, she ended up paying 780 siglos, plus a ruby ring for good measure. And now it was finally night time. Alright, that's the end of that chapter. Bye-bye. Saturnastra Ahi, chapter 51. Making the most out of a mess situation. Sin had made his way back to the outskirts of the city to fetch Horsey, and he was being taken care of by the Fangs. The Fangs referred to camp outside the city as money-saving precautions. And the horses' stables were well furnished. At another time, the stable of this house could house 12 horses and 4 carriages, and now there were only 2 mares and a pack mule. And the stable master was apparently one of Tawasi's daughters, and the other was posing as the maid. Once in return, he was greeted by a luxurious meal, and there was plenty of assortments of rice and wild games. And before, the Tawasi's daughters were playing the role of servants, and they were not doing dinner as was the custom of the day. More than half a year rolled by uneventfully, and during this time, the last room in Tawasi's home was rented out on several occasions. And mostly only stayed for for a couple of weeks. And to test out his skills, Tawasi asked him to plan a birthday party for her eldest daughter, Abigail, which meant father spread and joy. And she was turning 17, which meant that her internal clock was thinking. And about 90% of all of the girls in the city were married by the age of 15, and they were usually married to men 5 or 10 years their senior. And some religions practice polygamy, and this was more common among the warrior caste. And during Abigail's birthday, Tawasi browsed Brunhilda into finding a proper husband for Abigail, since she wasn't having much luck, preferably a man who was only 1 year older than her daughter. Tawasi hadn't taken care of all this herself, and she needed a third party to conduct negotiations. If she did it herself, then this would prove to the other that Tawasi had fallen into harsh financial straits. The good matchmakers could set their own prices. Brunhilda did a market study of the marriage business in the city, and she read all the books pertaining to the subject supplied by Tawasi. During those few months, he amused himself by exploring the city, and he did this whenever he was prowling about a new place, and he did don his black rose that he used to sneak in about, and he even observed the forbidden religious ceremonies in spite of the Hatishas custom pestering and the guards and all of the traps that were designed to keep him out of there. And after a few months of playing hide and seek, the Hatishas gave up on pursuing the ever-lucid Ahi. And after they stopped searching for him, the temples lost all of their allure. And as foreseen, he was apprenticed to the high priest of the god of Ninasu, and he was learning of the healing arts of the god of the seas and healing. And a combination, if you ask me, commented wicked Sophie. And to the Brunhilda was going to the market for a different purpose, and she had finally settled on several targets, and she knew the high and the low and the medium price for Abigail, and by now Brunhilda's fate was well recognized among the locals, and in the marketplace, Brunhilda could walk alone in peace. However, when dealing with the locals, she still required the presence of a man. And so the Persian and scene were busy. Brunhilda asked Ahi to come along. Ahi wore his black green rose with a slight shoulder spot, and he had decorated golden gibberish for decoration, and he also wore sandals. The pair made their way to the marriage market, and all of the marriage negotiations were done in this location, and the market was within a large assembly room, and the halls were decorated with rugs featuring golden animals from the savannah against a blue background. In the center there was a marble staircase, and the Celestinas would go out there and showcase the proposed bride, and among the richest families the Celestinas came along and simply advocated the family fortune, and the men in the crowd would offer a bride price to match the offered dowry, and aside from the raised platform there was a podium with an announcer guy, and he gave the crowd a brief introduction. And Brunhilda made her way towards the announcer and handed him a piece of paper, and he read it over the top and mumbled, "I don't understand this funny script of yours, write it in a way that I can read it." Brunhilda looked at the text over the top, and she wrote it again, and she sat down, and then the announcer said, "The next marriageable maiden is Abigail, daughter of Tawasi, the widow of Benestina, and like we all know, their family fortune has declined in ouch." And he threw a small pebble at his head before anyone was none the wiser. And this made the man chuckle, and the real pity was that the impact was akin to a shot of a BB gun or rubber bullets. And he went out with Brunhilda to the podium, and the men started mumbling among one another, and Brunhilda got out from her magic pouch a scroll. And he read it. "Abigail is a healthy 17-year-old girl looking for a boy over the same age," translated he. And they obtained a few murmurs from the crowd, and Brunhilda rolled up the drawing and then brought out a perfume bottle, and it smelled of lilacs, vanilla, and a bit of rose. And she spread it on top of the handkerchief and threw it at the crowd, and a perplexed older gentleman picked it up. And he explained that Tawasi wanted us to highlight her lady's habit and all that sort of nonsense, and frankly manners are completely useless in the face of producing a powerful brood, explained, and he pointed to the animal carpets. And then he continued, after listening to Brunhilda's suggestion, "Marriage tendencies among humans are flawed, and one should value producing the best offspring, and one who is likely to survive even the most extreme circumstances," explained he, looking onwards towards the man. And Brunhilda then pointed towards the men in the warrior class. "And take for example the lions. They are polygamous like Jolad, and only the strongest male has the largest brood, and yet," said he, stopping to build a suspense, "you fail to see the physical importance of the lioness. It is she who performs all of the kill, and Abigail is a lioness in search of a lion," finished he. And even the side of a lion metaphor was a bit cheesy, but whatever. Brunhilde was apparently fishing for someone from the warrior cast. The warrior cast was about was his ranking, and one of the old men from the warrior cast asked, why so much emphasis on the same age? The sooner the breeding starts, the more offspring they may produce. Among the Spartan warrior city-state, men and women only breed at the age of 18, and this assured a healthy stock of warrior and low infant mortality rate and high pregnancy survival rates, explained Ahi. And who are the Spartans? Asked some of the men in the crowd. And the same man continued, and what's this common marriage happening? Is this a common marriage happening in your city-state? And then he pointed to Brunhilde said, she said that Dragon King have other breeding habits. However, they did breed with humans from time to time, said he pointed to Brunhilde and then to a random person in the area. And then one whispered to one another, and the announcer then said, if you're a dragon, then prove it. Shed your human skin and turn into the beast you once were. Brunhilde handed her magic bag to Ahi, and she stripped bare, her stripping bare, accompanied by hooting from the crowd. And the hooting turned to terrors of scream when she changed into her draconic splendor. And among all those who fled, the only ones who remained were the warrior caste and a few curious high priests. And the announcer then said, what? The name of the gods? A real dragon! Brunhilde's frame was as large as a horse, and her open wings made her seem bigger than what she was. Brunhilde snorted a whistle of fire, and the announcer cowered behind his pulpit. Ahi then translated Brunhilde's growl. According to Albion of the North, all dragons started life as ordinary lizards, and through selective breeding they were able to become such magnificent creatures. And if the humans do the same, they can overcome their limitations, their physical limitations. Brunhilde flapped her wings and then sitting up. The process takes millions of years, and human mothers must mate from the age of 18 to 25 with child they should abstain from drinking alcohol, raw foods, teas, and bad cheese, and meals should be small and plentiful, and once a day they should eat a fruit or something, finished Ahi. And the warriors rolled their eyes, and then he said, 5,000 sequels for Abigail in her instruction manual. Brunhilde nodded in response, and she assumed her human form and got dressed again, and both Ahi and Brunhilde left the marriage market with the old warrior. And he was the old man Brunhilde had thrown the handkerchief to, and she had been fishing for him since she had entered the marriage market. And the old man bred war horses for the army, and he had a harem of 15 wives, and with his last 4 wives he had been testing out his horse breeding principle, and he believed he could produce stronger warriors with the right ingredients. His name was Airy, and he was quite the eccentric fellow, though he hid his eccentricities well. No one knew what was going on inside that head of his, though through her clever advertising, Brunhilde had secured a large prize without having to offer a dowry, and Airy guided us towards his home, and this was located in the warrior district within the inner city walls. And the houses were large and good number, featured training rings, and each house leader had a harem of at least 8 brides, and instead of dining, Airy led us to the backyard, and he signaled to one of his servants who brought out 2 chairs, as he sat down facing the host, and this made Airy frown. And minutes later the servants brought out tea and biscuits, and for some reason he was glaring at him, and Airy said, so, you had done some research on me, and was the offer truthful or just a cry for my attention? He blinked twice and shook his head, and then he said, can you repeat what you just said? Sighing, Airy thought, what a bother, and then he said to Brunhilde, and what is it that you come to offer? Before he started translating what Brunhilde tried to say, Airy was obvious question, if she can understand me, then why does she speak so bizarre? And he shrugged his shoulders in response, and then he said, she said that she came to negotiate a marriage contract of Abigail with her youngest son Gideon. Gideon? Yeah, I think that was his name. Gideon is an eternal bachelor, and I never trust him with money, and besides, Kid would never agree to marry, said Airy with his usual brutal honesty. And soldiers are not everything, though they think they are, and he may be as useless as a soldier, but he has plenty of other untapped potential in other departments, translated Brunhilde. It also pray to tell me what employment my son should practice, inquired Airy. And Mr. Brunhilde shrugged his shoulders in response, and he suggested spy. He has a knack for fading into the background. This rambling about Gilda went back and forth, and by sunset Brunhilde had completed her negotiations, and between us Brunhilde had thought of Gideon because he was easily manipulated, and his last personality would make it easy for Abigail to lord over him. And she painted Gideon with the brightest color, and Gideon truly was quite a nice chap. In fact, Airy only knew hearsays about his son, and like most men in his kingdom, he kept his children at arm's length, and he never bothered to truly get to know his entire brood unless they proven to be especially talented in swordplay. Alright, so that's the end of that chapter. Bye-bye, God bless. Hello, my name is Teresita Blanco Artsy sister, and we're continuing with Saturnastra Ahi. This is chapter 51, Sacred Flame. Tonight was a calm and frozen night, and there was a strong wind coming from the north. Ahi was on top of one of the guard towers overlooking the savannah, and the animals in the savannah were still as death, and from time to time a cloud would pass by, obscuring the crescent titan moon. The wind died down, bringing with it a unique stillness. Ahi's black clay stopped furrowing, and it too mimicked the stillness of the night. The light torches began to go out one by one, and Ahi's breathing an icy chill of the night. And with the light slowly dissipating, Ahi was able to better focus on the horizon. It seemed to him that there were hundreds of fireflies. However, there were no fireflies in the savannah as far as he knew. He flew up in the night sky to get a better view, and his back was cast against a faint golden light of the titan moon. As strong wind made Ahi rise further, and the further he flew, the greater the number of flames that appeared in the darkness, and there was a sea of campfires a few miles from the city. Ahi landed on top of one of the guard towers, and a half-asleep sentry asked, "So, do you see anything?" "There's an army approaching," said Ahi coolly. This news struck the sentry like a bucket of cold water, and he looked over the horizon, but he did not see anything. The sentry said, "I don't see anything. Are you sure you saw an army? People camp near the city too from time to time. This doesn't mean that they're an invading force." And he shrugged his shoulders and said nothing, and he jumped down from the tower and made his way towards the central market. The night guards were going lamppost by lamppost, reigniting them. Sin was waiting for Ahi by the central fountain, and he too was dressed in black robes and a black cape, and Ahi asked Sin, "What's the matter?" "I don't know, I just feel a little fidgety tonight," said Sin Johnny. "I know what you mean," said Ahi, folding his arm, and he bit his lower lip and frowned. And he had to strain his eyes to notice Brunhilda camouflaged into the column of a nearby temple. And Sin commented while pointing to Brunhilda, "She has been acting strange for these past few days." "We should leave town before anything bad happens," said Ahi, looking towards one of the exits. "Are you worried about the army?" inquired Sin. "I heard from my master that the main force was coming back, so it's safe to say that they're not here to invade." "Yeah," said Ahi, looking at the empty street. Brunhilda snapped her fans, and she made her mane stand on end. Sin then said while looking at Brunhilda, "Well, she is more feral than most, and her kind has a second sense when it comes to danger." "I learned to trust her intuition as well," said Ahi. "All that remains is to discover the source of the malice." "Do you really want to stay here and wait for things to happen?" asked Sin, shaking his head. "The wisest course of action will be to leave this place as well," mused wicked Sophie. "And have you seen anything out of the ordinary?" asked Ahi. "It depends on what is business as usual in this city. We simply do not have enough observations to draw an accurate conclusion." "That being said, the tables have been pretty busy as of lately," commented wicked Sophie. All our attention was drawn by the Persian passing by, and he was with his wares strapped to a large cart being pulled by a horse. And it was unusual to see him pack up and leave in the middle of the night. He was the kind of man who liked to maintain a presence in every marketplace, and his leaving meant that there was no longer a profit to be made in this city. "Where are you going?" asked Sin. "Home," said the Persian. "How come?" we asked. "It seems like a good time as any," commented the Persian, continuing on his way. Brunhilda mused a little while she tried to make sense of what was happening. After the brief conversation, he continued on his way, as the carriage stopped by him, and he too stopped to inspect within. And inside there was a lady dressed in robes, and in a soft voice she said, come in, I must speak with you, Ahi." Ahi shrugged his shoulders and he went inside. And the carriage circled aimlessly throughout the city, seeing Brunhilda follow along. Ahi rested his head on his hand and said, "What is it that you want with me, princess?" Taken aback, the princess said, How do you know? Your son gives you away, and mind you, I have a very bad nose," said Ahi, tapping his small nose. "Is that so? I have an offer to make. My kingdom is in dire need of your assistance, and with your aid and the power of your dragons, I am certain we can bring peace to my home. And will you not end me in my noble pursuit?" she pleaded, making her universal sign of prayer. He beat the fingernail of his thumb a bit pensive, and then he said, sighing in imitation of Mildred, "Can you humans solve your own problem, and must we dragons always get involved in your psychodrama?" "I beg your pardon, I was not aware that you were a dragon." Her tone seemed quite different, and then she said, "This simplifies matters." She drew a sleeping pattern on his face, and his body went limp, and when he awoke, he was in the center of a pentagram. And there was priests with incense all about, and for the last 2 hours they had been speaking words of magic in a vain attempt to bind Ahi to their will. A cold breeze lifted the drapery adorning the roof of the temple, and there was a circular hole in the roof, and the ground around Ahi had a stars marking the constellation. One by one, the Hatishas of the city manifested before Ahi, enjoying the revelry, and all the goddesses of the city were gathering in this very spot, and the sole purpose was to bind Ahi to their will the same way they had done so with the ice dragon of legend. This so-called ice dragon of legend had loved the human maiden, and in his delusion he had given her his true name. With his true name, the maiden was able to bind him to the city and make him her slave. And this current princess hoped to do the same with Ahi. Ahi knew and placed his hands in prayer position while gazing at the night sky. There was a nice year as the spirit spoke all of Ahi's name, and they had taken the time to write down Ahi's complicated introduction, and the names were the basis of the power in this town, and Ahi began to emit a pale white light, and markings began to appear on his skin as the binding ritual continued, and suddenly the wind died altogether, and there was magic in the air making a whirl sound, and the ceremonial glass statue of the ice dragon was decapitated, and the letter in his body shot away from him like crimson bullets, and they impaled itself in the circular radius marking the columns and even the priests attending the ceremony. And his robes became pure white, and even his skin began to illuminate, and the ground opened beneath him, and for a brief second all that we saw was the azure blue sky and the morning sun glowing in all of its glory. For the last few months, he and his friends had been avoiding humans, and they were pretty bummed down by the priestess attempting to bind Ahi like he was some common dragon. And the one person who was greatly disappointed was him, and he did not understand why had not made an example of the city like obvious the sentence had done up north so many years ago. And it was through their power that dragons have not been of a couple tree, and the tree in this type of tree can reach a tower in 2,000 feet. And this one was one of the oldest couple trees in the forest. As such, it towered 359 feet. From this spot, he could see the entire forest, and Brunhilde beside him was catching the horizon. And she was sitting beside Brunhilde holding a large white parasol, and it had a lovely colorful scene displaying the Norman gods having a feast. And the two figures in the foreground were Loki and Gylfan, and Odin was in the middle, apparently chastising Loki. And the light showers were falling over the jungle, and there was a faint mist descending from the sapphire blue mountains. And he suddenly said, we best get going home tomorrow. If we wait any longer, I won't be able to take you guys home." "You're not going to stay with us forever?" asked Xena, taking a bath. "Forever is a long time," said Ahi dryly. "We can still see each other from time to time. It's just that I made a promise, and I promised my brother that I was going to take him home, that I was going to go home with him and all the rest to see our parents," said Ahi, shaking his head sadly. "Can we come with you?" asked Sin. "That's not up to me for to decide. After all, this is a family affair." Sin was quiet for a while, and the clouds parted slowly enough to allow the helioplasm to shine his golden rays over the azure mountain. Helioplasm is what they call the sun. And these rays slowly made their way towards Ahi as the clouds moved and dissipated. The end.